Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do another video on the Acura Legend. And the reason behind that is because we actually found a problem with our cooling system on this car. So it's very much still winter here in Vermont in the Northeast. It's actually snowing as I look out the window recording this. But we go through a series of checks to make sure that when the spring comes and we have those long travels ahead of us, that we have an optimally functioning vehicle. Well, one of those checks failed, and that's the cooling system on the Acura Legend. So let's go into detail about what it was and how we went ahead and corrected it. So let's get started. Well, one of the common problems with the Acura Legend, besides its head gasket issues, is the cooling system. It's quite persnickety in the fact that cooling fans struggle to perform and sensors tend to fail. And this is exacerbated as age clicks on with these cars. So let's go over quickly some of the common components, where they might fail, and how to identify what that issue is. All right, so let's get into the Acura Legends cooling system. I'm going to describe every component underneath the hood as well as some components inside the cabin that I want you to consider as we go through the diagnostic trouble that we identified with our car. So let's go over what issue we had with our cooling system. The issue specifically was when you put the key on in the ignition and turned it just to on, so that's 2 clicks in that direction, we identified that our cooling fans would immediately turn on. Well, the problem with that is that this would turn on regardless of the climate control. So if the climate control is on and it thinks that the AC is being demanded, the condenser fan and subsequently the radiator cooling fan will kick on. Well, in our vehicle, the climate control was off, but the cooling fans were still functioning, even though it's probably about 40 degrees in my garage most of the time. That tells me that we have an issue with our cooling system. Now, where it is the challenge. How do you diagnose that? Now, we had some issues with the radiator and we went ahead and replaced that. Well, it seemingly appeared to us that everything was functioning correctly. And in fact, having your cooling fans run more often isn't necessarily a problem. However, it does affect your AC unit, and specifically your compressor, I should call out. So with your cooling fans on, the compressor will cycle. It will go on for a couple seconds, it'll run, and then it'll click off. Well, you're not going to get good AC under those conditions if the compressor doesn't actually function as it's supposed to. It will click on and click off, and you might get some cold air, but you're not going to get the type of performance that you would want on those hot summer days. Additionally, that's not how the car functions, so it's inherently a problem. So we want to go ahead and fix that. Well, let's go ahead and dive into where all the components are on this car as an education to you and explain what they do. So let's start with the radiator. So as you know, the radiator is a common failure point with any car that has age and miles on it. And as these cars age, this is becoming more of a consideration that you should have when making sure that your cooling system is functioning properly. We went ahead and opted for the OEM replacement, which is the Denso radiator. You can see the part number is right on the radiator here. And if you watched our earlier video, you'll know that we had a Koyo radiator that had a failure between the top plastic cap and the bottom aluminum core. There's a gasket in between, and that gasket had failed, which prompted us to install a Denso radiator. Along with that, we went ahead and got a new radiator cap. You want to make sure that you get the right radiator cap specifications. As you can see here, this is 1.1, so that refers to the number of bars and pressure that that radiator is supposed to handle. If you have a bad gasket sealing here or you have a failed radiator cap, you can experience issues with your cooling system. So make sure that you also replace your radiator cap or at least evaluate whether it's good or not. The next thing I want to call out is this relay panel right here. The two relays that you're seeing right here, one where it's empty and one adjacent to it, this is the radiator relay and this is the condenser fan relay. These can go and fail, which will not allow your cooling fans to kick on. The relays activate and then send power to your cooling fans. So your cooling fans are right here. This is your radiator cooling fan. This is your condenser fan right here. And you want to make sure that your relays are functioning properly so that these fans kick on and you can tell whether your motor is failed or not. So in our investigation, we noticed that this relay had a crack on the exterior. So let's go ahead and show you that. So what we noticed was the cap, and now it got more broken as we took it out, but there was a crack right in this which would allow for water intrusion or would allow for dirt to enter the relay system. Now it broke as we were trying to get it out, but that's not significant here. You do want to take note of any damages to your relays. Relays have an important function, and if they're not functioning, your cooling system will not operate efficiently. So here is the Denso radiator fan relay. That's the part number. Go ahead and link everything down below too so that you can find these. But this is important to the system. Next, I want to go over the sensors because there's a lot of myths about the sensors. There's a lot of speculation about how the sensors function on here, and there's a lot of advice about which sensors to replace to make sure your cooling system functions. And I'm going to go over those. The first sensor that I want to go over is this sensor right here. This is a single lead sensor. It's just a cap, and it goes into this coolant pipe right here that leads into your radiator. This sensor right here is your gauge sensor. So what it does is it measures the coolant temperature and sends a signal over to your gauge cluster, and this is what allows you to see the temperature, whether it's cold or hot or in the middle. Now this sensor could fail and could produce erroneous readings, so you could replace this. Obviously with age anything is going to fail, and the potential for that to show inaccurate readings does exist, so you can replace this, and we'll go over a little bit more about this sensors and all the sensors in just a moment. But that's what that sensor does, is it sends readings to your gauge. The other one I see often recommended for replacement is this sensor over here. Now this sensor is called the TW sensor. The TW sensor sends a signal to the ECU to tell the ECU how cold or warm the coolant is, and subsequently the temperature of the engine. Now you would say, well, that obviously is part of the cooling system, right? No, it's actually part of the fuel injection system. What that sensor does is it sends that information about how cold or warm the engine is to the ECU, and it allows it to adjust the fuel trims on your engine. So is it part of the cooling system? No. Is it a critical part of your engine and the function of your car? Absolutely. But if it fails, will it stop the cooling fans from turning on? No. It will illuminate a code 6 check engine light on your car, which will indicate that it has failed. Now, some people would say, why not just replace it? Absolutely, you could just replace it, but I want to be clear. This has nothing to do with your cooling system and everything to do with how much fuel the ECU tells the engine to, or tells the injectors to send into the engine as the car is either warming up or is cold. So yeah, go ahead and replace it if you want to, but I want to make sure that you all know how that functions. The one sensor that I think ubiquitously everybody recommends is the one that's located on the bottom of the radiator. It's located right next to the lower radiator hose and is just threaded directly into the radiator. Now what that sensor does is literally tell the cooling fans to turn on or off. So as the temperature raises in the radiator, there's a thermo switch in there that says, or a thermo, I don't know if it's a switch, I can't remember if it's a switch or a resistor, but anyways, regardless of the point, it tells the cooling fan controller to turn on your cooling fans when it reaches a certain temperature. So that one is crucial, and if it fails, would directly lead to the cooling fans not turning on. One sensor that I don't hear spoken is the oil temperature sensor. Now that one actually does have to do with the cooling system. It's located on the back side of the engine, so I can't unfortunately show you that. But what that does is it senses the oil temperature of the engine and it prolongs the cooling fan timer so that when you turn your car off and the cooling fans stay on for a while, that's driven by that sensor on the back. Now, I view that as more of a critical component in the cooling system functionality than the TW sensor. That oil temperature sensor on the back could allow your engine to cool faster between on and off cycles because it'll demand the cooling fan timer to stay on longer depending on how warm this engine gets. And if you're in a harsh climate, say like the Southwest, like Phoenix or New Mexico and Texas areas, this could be critical to making sure that your engine doesn't heat soak. So I would recommend that you at least investigate the potential of replacing that sensor or the functionality of it if you're noticing your cooling fans aren't staying on during harsh summer months. So let's go ahead and talk about the cooling fan module. Okay, so here we are inside the cabin. We went ahead and removed the sill plate right here, and lifted back the carpet, and we removed the inside panel over here. Now, if you pull the carpet back, there will be a metal plate that covers your ECU here, and on the back of that plate will be this black box. This is your cooling fan control module. This will tell under whatever condition based on the sensor readout when to kick on the cooling fans, and it will subsequently turn off the compressor for your AC system. So you can see how it's starting to tie together. Over here, attached to your side, is the cooling fan timer module. This timer module also sends a signal to the cooling fan controller to kick on when scenarios are met after the car is turned off. And one of those scenarios is driven by the oil temperature sensor, so you can see the connection there as well. So let's go into what our problem was. So our problem on this car was actually, I think, the cooling fan timer. Now, it's hard to understand because electronics, after about 30 years old, are really difficult to ascertain what is failed on those circuit boards. Now, they're PCM boards, and if you're familiar with PCM boards, they're fairly basic. And I'll insert the clip here about how we went ahead and did that. Okay, everyone, so I'm going to show you the two fan control units for the Acura Legend. On the left-hand side, we have the fan control unit, which is identifiable by its larger connection size. And this is the fan timer unit, identified by its smaller connection size. As you can see, they're pretty much basic standard PCB boards with basic componentries, resistors, diodes, capacitors, some switches, internally built-in chips here. And for the most part, you could actively rebuild this board. There's nothing special about this. So as these parts become discontinued, this may be a real option. So I went ahead and tested all the components on both sides. What I was able to learn is that the parts themselves seem to test out fine, although you can't test every component on there while it's in circuit. But you can use your visual senses or your visual sense to identify potential problems between these components and the PCB board itself. So if we take a look at this, we can identify where problem points might be on the board. And one potential error or potential source of a problem may be the fact that these solder joints look a little weak, and particularly this one right here. And if I use a pointing implement here, you can see that right here on this board that looks like a little bit of a halo around this solder joint. This really indicates that the solder has started to degrade and could be a source of problems. So as we go over our Acura Legend and we're looking for remedies to our problem, this might be one problem that we could easily fix by reflowing the solder. So we will go ahead and reflow the solder on all the joints that we can identify here that look like they may be degraded and starting to break away. But needless to say, something within the board ended up failing, and we were able to resolve that through reflowing the solder joints on there. Now, when we click on the car, it will no longer turn the cooling fans on immediately, but that's not enough. So you could go through and send those modules out and have them properly diagnosed for failure points. Solder being one of the more common issues because as solder heat cycles, it ends up becoming brittle and cracks. So that's why we went ahead and reflowed the solder joints. Now, additionally, there are pieces of the PCM board that may fail. Things like diodes, things like resistors, and so you may want to have it properly diagnosed. The cooling fan control module from this car is shared with the RL, and the RL has a revised part number, which makes me think that that module may have some enhancements to prevent that from happening. Now, solder points will still go ahead and break, but there may be some more robust components contained within. The cooling fan timer, unfortunately, is discontinued, but those boards are very similar and can share a lot of componentry, such as diodes and resistors. So you could have it rebuilt by an expert in that field, such as an electrical engineer. So I want to share that with you. We'll go ahead and insert the clips, like I said, so that you can learn what these boards look like, you can learn how we did it, and you can troubleshoot your issues. Now, some of the more common issues that I've heard with the Acura Legends cooling fan system related to the modules themselves is that the cooling fans won't kick on at all. I had the opposite problem. My problem was they wouldn't stop running. And some of the issues with the cooling fan timer are that it continues to run and drain the battery. So if you are experiencing any weird abnormalities with your cooling fans, it's likely something with your module. Now, if they don't click on at all, you do have to go through the process of understanding, is it a relay? Is it the fans themselves? Or is it the switch at the bottom of the radiator? Or could it be some of the other sensors that are influencing how the control module functions? So you do have to go through those diagnostic testing to understand where your failure is. But needless to say, the weak point is often those modules. So hopefully that's a little bit of a tip here, and hopefully that aids you in diagnosing your Acura Legend problems. Okay, so here are the 3 sensors that people recommend to replace. And let's just quickly go over them again. So this is your cooling fan switch. This is actually in the radiator. This is your cooling gauge, your coolant temperature gauge, and this is the TW sensor. And so here's the part number from BECK and ARNLEY on all of these if you want to go ahead and replace them. Now, I didn't go OEM because some of these sensors are discontinued. They're a little bit difficult to get. I believe you can still get this sensor because it was used in a lot of Acuras and Hondas. I don't think these two are readily available. At least I couldn't get my hands on them. But one word of advice is I would not get them from eBay. I saw a ton of postings on eBay for these parts, but I question their authenticity and whether or not they would survive long term. I believe they're probably knockoffs. So this is a company that has been known for good quality over the years, has even been an OEM supplier. So this sensor is the one that goes in the bottom of the radiator. It has a gasket on it. I always recommend that you put a little bit of thread sealant on these just to make sure that they don't leak. There's nothing worse than having a leak in your radiator or cooling system. So go ahead and do that. This is your temperature gauge sending sensor. Pretty simple, one lead. You can see how after about 30 years you get some corrosion on that. You also get some buildup just naturally. This could affect the temperature reading on this sensor. And you can see there's a little bit of thread sealant on this one, so make sure you put thread sealant back on this. Pretty simple. I'll put all the torque specs in this video as well for you. And then this is the TW sensor. Like I said, you can go ahead and replace this if you want, but I want to make sure that you understand its purpose and functionality. It has nothing to do with the cooling system and has everything to do with your fuel injection system, sending information to the ECU. That's that part number. And the one that I'm missing here is the oil temperature sending one. We went over how that can increase the cooling fan timer, and that would be a critical one that I would recommend to replace. I'll put the part number down below in the description of this video so that you have that information. All right, so we're going to go ahead and replace the sensor at the bottom of the radiator. We went ahead and tested both fans. Both fans passed the test, which means that they are functioning correctly. Now, for peace of mind, we're going to go ahead and replace this sensor. This is the sensor that's located at the bottom of your radiator that when the temperature raises to a certain point, it sends a signal to turn on the relay, which then sends power to your fans. So this is located right at the bottom here. It is that sensor that's right there. There's a single wire harness that goes over across the bottom of the radiator fan and then connects to that brown connector. That is a 22 millimeter wrench. So I got my wrench over here for 22 millimeters. We've got the fan backed off. So there's 2 bolts on the top, 2 on the bottom, all 10 millimeters. You can go ahead and just remove the top ones and loosen the bottom ones enough so that you can slip the fan out and get out of your way. You're going to want to set up a coolant pan at the bottom of this and make sure that you have extra coolant to top off. But since it's located at the bottom, you're not going to have any issues with air. You're just going to have to work fast. So I went ahead and got our sensor all set up here with our thread sealant on it. This will allow it not to leak. And next thing is, we'll go ahead and replace that. Simple enough. Okay, so we went ahead and got our new sensor, and it's right down there, as you can see. So lost maybe about 200 mLs, I would say, of coolant. Not bad at all. Went ahead and topped that off and made sure that I squeezed the upper radiator hose a couple times just to shake out any potential bubbles that got trapped in the top here. Now, you could bleed this again if you were super paranoid about air being in the system, but because, like I said, it's draining out through the bottom, and if you work relatively quickly, you're not going to lose that much, so there really shouldn't be any air in there. But it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and bleed the system again or run a Lyle funnel on top of it just so that the potential of air is eliminated. So we went ahead and replaced the other 2 sensors, the one that goes up on for the gauge and the one for the TW. And you could go ahead and replace the back one, which we didn't, but we'll do at a future time. Got our new Denso relay in. That's over here. Here is the relay replacement for the radiator fan. It has this part number now. We'll go ahead and install that, and that will wrap up this video. This is how you do a comprehensive review on your cooling system, test and make sure that it is running appropriately as designed and functioning for those long summer months. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a message down below. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.